Welcome to week 7 of organizational behavior, and I'm your online instructor, of course, Diana Block. And this week we are going to look at chapters 13 and 14. And in chapters 13 and 14, we're looking at an examination of power and different concepts related to power. And then in chapter 14, we're going to look at some conflict theory. So let's go ahead and look at some of the important topics in both of those areas. When we look at, oh, this isn't the right slide. Hold on. Here we go. So when we're talking about power, there's a lot of different concepts that relate to power. A lot of times we just talk about it in a general sense, but there are specific types of power and there are specific sources of power. And influence is one form of power. The textbook tells us that influence is the ability to um, move or impel someone to action. And generally, influence has a positive connotation. It implies that you have a level of respect such that you're able to influence people's decisions. A lot of times, the word power itself, for some reason, has a negative connotation that someone is exerting power, but influence is a form of power. And you also have authority, which is comes under the umbrella of power. It's some kind of legitimate control or command over others, possibly due to the position that you're in. You may be in a position of authority, which does give you power. And so when we talk about what are the various sources of power, we can look at table 13.2 on page 349, and it talks about some of the sources of power that people may have. Like the first one it talks about is referent power. And this is when someone identifies or admires a person, and so they give them power over them in the sense that they admire them and respect their decision making. You may have expert power. Expert power is when you possess specific knowledge or information that makes you powerful. Because you have information that others don't have, there's some power that goes along with that. Um, and then there is information power, whereas you're able to present clear and logical arguments of information. And so that allows you to have some level of power. And those three are considered soft sources of power. Referent power, expert power, and information power are types of power in which people choose to follow you or choose to be influenced by you because they respect you as a person, your experience level, or some specific information that that you have. So people choose to be influenced by you. There are also harsh sources of power, which create a situation where you're able to influence people, not necessarily because they want to follow you, but because they feel like maybe they have to follow you to avoid consequences. So when we're talking about harsh sources of power, we're looking at coercive powers, where someone is fears punishment if they don't follow your lead. Then there's also reward power, where a person, the opposite of punishment, they expect a reward if they do follow you. So it's not necessarily that they fear punishment, but they want a specific reward. And so when you have reward power, people will follow you to seek the reward. And then there's also legitimate power, which is when someone has a formal position and therefore they have the right to make decisions, so you follow them for that reason. For example, if you're the subordinate, you will follow your boss's leadership because they are the boss. So those are the harsh sources of power: the coercive power, reward power, and legitimate power. Um, some of those relate to how the person feels about you, how the follower feels about the leader, and they choose to follow them. Some of them are power given by hierarchy in the organization. They follow you because you're the person that is supposed to be followed. So when you look at the homework assignment, one of the things it asks you for is to consider the sources of power of this leader at the Disney company. So you want to use specific power sources that apply to this person. And like I said, they're on page 349. You'll also read about additional power sources like manipulation, um, third parties, control of resources. So there's other sources of power. Then when you look at power tactics are the actual ways that you go about using your power. You choose which tactics you will use to handle the power that you have over others. So these we're talking about specific behaviors. And at the bottom of page 351, and then it continues on page 352, we have some typical power tactics. And you can look at things like rational persuasion. This is where you use logical arguments and factual evidence to persuade. You might use inspirational appeals by appealing to someone's values. On the next page, you might see upward appeals, where you try to get the support of higher ups and build a coalition with them. So there's various tactics that you can use that are outlined to demonstrate the power that you have. And in your homework assignment, it asks you about Mr. Eisner from Disney's power tactics as well. So you want to look through the various power tactics that the book discusses and see if you believe any of these apply to him based on the information provided in the article. Lots of great information in chapter 13 about the topic of power. You'll also read about political behavior. These words don't go with it. So you'll look at political behavior as well. And in political behavior, these are activities that are not part of a person's role, but they're things that influence the organization. So a lot of us that have worked in corporations before, we've heard about people playing politics in the office. And so this is where people are schmoozing, trying to get along with certain people, creating cliques in order to have more power in the organization. Things that aren't really a part of their job, but their political behavior. Things like favoritism, nepotism, being a yes man, things like that. Those are what we generally consider political behavior. So that's in chapter 13 as well. Now, I want to have time to look at some topics related to conflict because the second part of your assignment asks you to describe the situation in the article using conflict theory. So when we look at conflict theory in chapter 14, we see a lot of information about how we can classify conflict. The first thing that it talks about is manifest and latent conflict. Manifest conflict is conflict that you can actually see. You can actually observe that this is going on. There's a conflict here with these individuals. Latent conflict is a conflict that is hidden. Often there is conflict and people don't know about it because there's hidden feelings and hidden agendas that are creating conflict. So that would be a latent conflict. So when you're discussing the article, you want to talk about whether this conflict is manifest or latent. Then you've also got different types of actual conflict. Every conflict is not the same. You can have a relationship conflict, and just like it sounds, there's an incompatibility between people just due to either personality or work style, decision making style. It's just a relationship conflict that maybe people just don't like each other or irritated by certain people. That's completely different from a task conflict. A task conflict is where there's different viewpoints about how to do the actual work. It's nothing personal. It's not about a specific person that you just don't like. We just disagree about how to go about getting our work done in the most efficient way, or what work should be done, even. Then you've got process conflict, and this is more where it's not about a specific task, but the conflict is about what our process should be, how resources should be allocated. We can have disagreements about who's responsible for a specific task, and that would be a process conflict of who should handle this, which department should take this on. And so then there's conflict. And so there's different kinds of simple relationship conflict where you just don't like a person, you don't like their personality, you don't like the way they chew gum. That's completely different from a task conflict, um, where we're actually looking at specific tasks and we just simply disagree about which task should be done, and different from a process conflict where we're just not clear as a group on who should do what and how. So different types of conflicts. So identify in the homework assignment whether we're talking about a relationship conflict, a task conflict, or a process conflict. And then, of course, the text explains that some conflicts are constructive and necessary. They help us, constructive conflicts help us search for new facts, methods, new solutions. It helps the group work through issues and have more cohesion. So sometimes conflicts are constructive. Some of the most progress we've made in our nation has been due to conflict. People didn't agree with the way things were being done and they fought against it. And in the end, we all have a better situation. Laws are changed, what have you. The same thing in companies. People talk and debate about the work and the process and how things should be done. And hopefully, everyone's ideas come together into a new, more efficient solution for the firm. So those type of conflicts are constructive. It's when you have a destructive conflict that it can be a problem. In a destructive conflict, there are actual efforts by certain parties to block achievement of either another party or of the firm. There sometimes are groups that are more concerned about competing with each other than in completing the company's goals or their tasks at work. And then in destructive conflicts, you've got emotions or attitudes that are just actually interfering with the problem solving. Too much personal stuff, personal issues and emotions, and the work isn't being done. So those are definitely destructive conflicts. So when you look at the conflict in the homework assignment, is it constructive or destructive? Then you will see some methods for dealing with conflict. The text talks about having either behavioral interventions to deal with conflict, where you are using personal strategies to help manage the conflict, arranging maybe for employees to have additional training or go through team building or problem solving classes, or you can have structural intervention to relieve conflict. This is where you actually maybe change the task, change the reward structure, change the process of how we're doing the work that might resolve a conflict. And goes on to give you additional information about conflicts, different people that are involved in conflicts. You've got integrators who are showing concern for everyone in the conflict and want to have open exchange to resolve it. Then you've got some obligers who are just showing concern for others. They'll just minimize their own concerns and differences to try to satisfy others. Then you've got some dominators. These are people that are really competitive and they want what they want and they show a low concern for others. So there's different types of people involved in conflicts: integrators, obligators, dominators. Do you see any of these types in the conflict that is discussed in the homework? You also have avoiders and compromisers, and the textbook will tell you about those people. So our 15 minutes is just about up. So hopefully I've given you some things to really look at in both of these chapters. We're talking about power and conflict that'll help you drill down to the specific concepts and terminology that you can use to explain the assignments in your homework. And just a reminder, next week we're doing our movie analysis paper. So if you haven't by chance gotten a hold of the movies that we discussed in week one, and they're still posted in the week one area, the paper assignments, if you need to review that, make sure you get a hold of your movie and watch that right away so that you can complete your movie analysis paper next week. I look forward to talking to you in the discussion area. Have a great week.